I didn't really know anything about the Sikh tradition until I first met you and heard your presentation. So I wonder if we can zoom back for a second. If you could tell us when, where, why the Sikh faith started.
So the Sikh tradition is about 550 years old. It originates in a region of South Asia called Punjab, which constitutes modern day Pakistan and northwestern India. And it emerges in a context that I think is actually very similar to what we have today. There's a lot of cultural mixing, interaction, religious diversity, ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity. And there's people are trying to figure out, how do we live alongside one another? And kind of like today, they're not really doing a good job. They're fighting over ideas of hierarchy and who's better than who, and people come out with supremacist ideas and they institutionalize them, and it becomes a social context of deep pain and suffering and inequality. And it's in this context that the founder of Sikhism, Guru Nanak, is born. And he looks around as he's growing older and understanding society. And he says, we don't have to live this way. There are other ways of living that might be easier, that might invoke less division and hatred and violence. And the vision that he begins to offer is one that is rooted in a very simple concept, but one I think that still feels profound today, and that is the oneness of all creation. It's from this basis, what we call it in Punjabi is ik onkar, and it's the first term in the Sikh scripture. And it appears over and over again throughout it. And what it's essentially telling us is that the interconnectedness of all creation has a number of profound corollaries, right? So if I truly believe that we are all interconnected, then there's no place for me to discriminate against someone on the basis of who they are. There's no place for me to judge anyone. There's no place for me to presume that I'm better than anyone or worse than anyone. One of the things that Guru Nanak says is, Hum nahi change, bura nahi koi. I'm not good, but also no one's bad. And the teaching in the Sikh tradition is that everyone is equally divine. One of the sort of social and political outcomes then is, if you truly believe this, then how do we work in a way to make it so in our society, so that everyone has equal access to opportunity, to joy, to freedom, to resources? And so this becomes a really important part of Sikh philosophy that has drawn me in as well, something that I really have come to believe.
One thing I was kind of struggling with as I read your book and this idea of this radical connectedness is like, how do you recognize or feel a connection with people or systems that are just perpetuating harm and division? How do you make sense of that disconnect or paradox?
Rather than aiming for an ultimate outcome in which we see connectedness, which I think is what so many of us do, especially in the modern West, to say, at some point, hopefully, we will achieve unity and that we will see one another as equally human and feel a connection between one another. What the Sikh philosophy asks us to do is take that as our starting point and to say, we are interconnected and we can understand that. And then all of the sort of differences that manifest themselves among us are not necessarily dividing lines, but they're different kinds of expressions of the oneness. And I think to your question there around, well, how do you do that with people who cause you harm? What I found to be really meaningful in my own day-to-day experience of meeting people in this world who don't like me because of how I look or because I believe something different from them. And for me to be able to see their humanity, even in the midst of the pain or the suffering they might be trying to bring into my life. You know, some people think when I say that I'm saying you should excuse the ugliness of their actions and simply just say, well, we're still connected and I'm fine with you if you're fine with me. And I don't think that's what I'm saying. I think it's a both and that is enabled by the starting point of interconnection to say, you are human and we are connected, and I do see you as divine. And it's also true that the actions that you're bringing into the world are not reflective of the values that I hold to be true. And I can still hold you accountable to those. And I can still call you out for the pain that you produce while also still loving you as a fellow human being.